Get off the grass or I'll make sure you can't walk at all.
Those words came from Marcelli Harrow, president of our HOA board, as she raised a silver revolver and fired crack right into the ground, inches from my son's feet. The dirt jumped. Rowan froze. He didn't scream. He just looked at her with those wide, glassy eyes like the world had ended again. She didn't even flinch. "This area is a conservation buffer, violation of Article 7.4, she said, like it justified the powder and steel. What she didn't know? The camera mounted on the Glenwood utility pole across the street wasn't just some bird tracker, it's city infrastructure, and I know exactly how its footage is pulled, preserved, and subpoenaed. If she's still walking free by the end of the week, I'll be stunned. Subscribe now because this isn't just about a shot fired. This is what happens when a mother's dying wish is trampled by someone playing dictator with a clipboard. And trust me, I know the law better than she thinks she does. My name is Dr. Aldrich Wren, Civil Code Compliance Auditor for the State Commission. I don't install cameras. I audit the ones that put corrupt zoning boards in prison. I don't write HOA rules. I flag the ones that violate constitutional boundaries. And I didn't move here to fight. I moved here because my wife asked me to. 3 months before she passed, she circled a printout of Laurel Vale Reserve, this very neighborhood, and scribbled, "Somewhere safe, somewhere Rowan can just be a kid." It had trails, native grasses, rain-fed parks. She imagined peace. But Marcelli Harrow imagined a power grid, and now my son, 11 years old, was standing on a patch of that park, staring down a gun. Glenwood Knoll isn't a battlefield. It's a slope of green that overlooks the retention lake. The kids take cardboard down it in the spring. Rowan loved lying in it with a book, tracing cloud shapes. It's where I saw him laugh again for the first time after the funeral. It's where we brought the dog's ashes. It's where I promised him, quietly, that we'd never live in fear again. But Marcelli doesn't see children. She sees in fractions. She's not subtle either. 2 weeks ago, we got fined $350 for soil disruption after Rowan played tag with 2 neighbors. The HOA handbook doesn't even mention Glenwood Knoll as restricted land. But Marcelli wrote her own addendum, slapped it on her office window, and started mailing threats like she was code enforcement. She cited eco-preservation, but she was the one using a gas-powered trimmer on native grass. She called it a protected slope, but there's no signage, no fencing, just her voice, louder than the bylaws. And now she'd fired a weapon in my son's direction because he dared to sit on a hill with a library book. I stepped in between them, not because I thought she'd fire again, but because Rowan couldn't move. I heard the neighbors behind their curtains. One of them let out a gasp. Someone had called 911. Sirens were faint, but closing in. She turned to me, smug, breath steady. "I use blanks. He'll remember next time." I didn't answer her. I looked toward the utility pole, toward the lens I knew was still warm from recording every second. I smiled, just barely. "Marcelli," I said, "I hope your lawyer's good at chain of custody disputes." She blinked. The cruiser rolled up at the curb. Rowan grabbed my hand, finally trembling. He hadn't cried. He hadn't said a word. But when I knelt to him, he whispered, "I didn't know it was wrong." "It wasn't," I told him, "and she's about to learn what is." 7 minutes later, an officer zip-tied her wrists and led her to the back seat. She was still arguing about her authority, still muttering about bylaws. But I had a different set of rules. I'd helped draft them for cities bigger than this. I knew how to take her down. And I wasn't just doing it for Rowan. I was doing it for every kid who thought a park was a battlefield, and for every parent who thought silence was safer. This time, the camera wouldn't miss. The morning after the shot, I stood in front of the HOA office holding a citation that still smelled like fresh toner. "Repeated encroachment," it read. $500 fine. Due in 10 days. No formal hearing, no photographic evidence, no mention of the police report from the night before. Just Marcelli's signature scrawled like a curse at the bottom. The office door was locked. A sign said, "Administrative closure, staff retreatment day." I almost laughed. Rowan was at home, quiet again. He didn't eat breakfast, didn't touch the sketch pad he usually took to the porch. His eyes kept drifting to the edge of the yard, where the grass ended and Glenwood Knoll began, like it was a cliff now. She'd done it. With one pull of a trigger, she'd taken away the only place that had started to feel safe. I wasn't going to let her keep it. I went home, pulled out the HOA's digital handbook, and opened the community land use section. I'd read it before, but this time I dissected it like a statute. Sections 5.2 through 6.8 covered shared use areas. Nowhere was Glenwood Knoll listed as restricted terrain. No signage was required, no posted notices, no ratified addendum. Marsley's so-called conservation buffer was never voted in. It was her invention. And yet, over the past month, I'd seen 3 other parents get slapped with fines for things that didn't exist in the rulebook. A toddler's plastic scooter violated soil compaction standards. A grandmother's quilt on the grass encouraged unauthorized loitering. Her language was always just vague enough to sound like policy, but I knew better. She wasn't following regulations. She was making them up. I started combing through my inbox. There were over a dozen emails from the HOA in the past. 6 weeks, most of them automated, but I noticed something new. A thread from 2 other parents, residents I'd only spoken to in passing. One email had a single line. "If she's done it to you too, we need to talk." It was from Lorna, whose daughter Ava used to play with Rowan on the hill. I hadn't seen them together since the incident with the scooter. "Fine," I replied. Within an hour, we were on a video call. Lorna's expression said everything. Tired, frustrated, angry in a way only a parent could be when their kid is being punished for being a kid. She told me it was for the preservation plan, Lorna said. When I asked to see the vote, she said it was emergency approved under executive clause. I've never even heard of that. "There's no such clause," I told her. "The bylaws have no provision for unilateral declarations of protected zones, especially not ones that affect common recreational access." She leaned forward. "So you're saying she's lying?" "I'm saying she's inventing law and using fear to enforce it." Lorna paused. "She always walks around with that clipboard like she's the mayor." "Mayor with a loaded gun," I said. We were quiet for a moment. "She threatened Ava once, said if she saw her laying on the slope again, she'd see to it that the family's record reflected it. Like she's keeping files." "She is," I said, "but the only file that's going to matter is the one I'm building now." Lorna nodded. "You're not the only one." We ended the call, but I knew it wasn't the last. Back in my office, I created a folder on my desktop, Harrogym Violation Timeline. I started adding everything, the citation PDFs, screenshots of her handwritten notes posted in the HOA window, my own notes on HOA law inconsistencies. It was growing faster than I expected, but I needed more. I opened the HOA member portal, the one that allowed residents to view board minutes and proposals. Most of it was sanitized, but one thing caught my eye. A recurring preservation zone enforcement line item listed without supporting documents. No dates of vote, no attachments, no author notes. Only one name appeared repeatedly in the amendment drafts: M. Harrow. She was laundering her personal vendettas through empty admin fields. The police report from the shooting hadn't appeared in the HOA's Community Safety Updates feed either. Just a note that the HOA office would be closed pending internal reassessment. No apology, no statement, no warning to other parents. She was acting like nothing happened, but I knew better. And so did the cameras. Judge Thadrick Quell sat alone in the back corner of the community library's second-floor meeting room, pretending to read a quarterly budget memo. His eyes weren't moving. The document had been upside down for 10 minutes. I didn't say anything when I saw him. I just walked past his table, dropped a folded printout beside his elbow, and sat down 3 chairs away. He glanced at the document. It was a still frame, high resolution, from the city's traffic camera feed. Marcelli. The gun, the smoke, Rowan in the frame, barely visible. Frozen. He didn't touch it, but his hand tensed. "I thought you'd seen it already," I said quietly. He nodded once. "Live." So it was true. I'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed dug the weight deeper. "You were watching in real time?" "I was logged in through the HOA admin panel, scheduled grassland erosion review," he said. I wasn't expecting her to be there, or to draw on a child." He looked older than last time I'd seen him, which was only 2 weeks ago, back when he'd sat beside Marcelli during the board meeting, and nodded politely as she rattled off infractions like reading from a teleprompter. "She said it was a blank," I said. "Officer on scene collected a .22 casing." He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." His voice cracked, just enough. Then he cleared his throat and tried to straighten in the chair like a man rearranging his dignity. "I tried to report it internally," he said, "to the board, and they voted to delay response until the next full quorum, which she canceled, then posted the staff retreat notice. Of course." I turned toward him. "You're vice president of this board. You sat on it for how many years?" 13. "And in those 13 years, did you ever vote to make Glenwood Knoll a restricted zone?" His lips thinned. "Never." "But the preservation policy appears on the site with your signature below it." I didn't sign it. He didn't look at me when he said it. He stared out the tall glass window overlooking the very slope where it happened. From that angle, you could see the patch of disturbed soil where the bullet hit. I'd visited it that morning. Rowan wouldn't go near it. "She's using your name," I said. "I know," he whispered. "You gonna let her keep using it?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched. A parent and their toddler passed by the glass wall. The child pointed out at the hill, laughing. The parent tugged them along, gently but nervously. "She told the board it was a security measure," he said finally, "that Rowan had been trespassing too close to the perimeter sensor." "There is no perimeter sensor." "I know." Another long pause. "When I joined the HOA board," he said, "it was to help with property line disputes. I was a boundary judge for 2 decades. Never thought it'd come to this. I didn't think a neighborhood with butterfly gardens and walking trails would end in a gun being drawn on my son." Thadric flinched. "She keeps saying she's protecting something," I said. "What is she really protecting, Judge?" He looked over at me finally. "Control, that's it. She's afraid of losing it." "And what are you afraid of?" He didn't answer, but his jaw clenched. Then he stood up slowly, took the printout, folded it again, tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat. "I'll get you what you need," he said. "Just don't ask how I got it." And he left without another word. I sat there a few more minutes, watching the sun shift over Glenwood Knoll, watching families steer clear of a patch of earth that once meant freedom to my kid. The woman who'd fired a gun at my son still hadn't made a statement, still hadn't shown her face since the arrest. And yet, her name lingered in every corner of this place, on signs, on notices, on digital rulebooks no one voted for. But now, for the first time, I wasn't the only one collecting evidence. And the man whose name she'd been hiding behind, he was finally stepping out of her shadow. Marsley returned exactly 5 days after the incident, not with an apology, not even with a statement, just a clipboard, a stiff smile, and a new stack of violation slips tucked under one arm like war medals. She acted like nothing had happened. Her revolver had been confiscated. She'd been released under pretrial supervision, pending a reckless endangerment charge. But here she was again, circling the neighborhood with her signature wedge heels and wrapped hair, eyeing shrubs like they were suspects, and measuring sidewalk cracks with a chrome ruler. I watched her from my driveway as she posted a laminated notice on the HOA board, a new citation tier, $750 for repeat green space abuse. She walked off without acknowledging me, like we hadn't stood 10 feet apart while she threatened my son's life. I waited for her to be gone before I approached the board. The notice wasn't even signed, no timestamp, no board vote log, just the HOA logo, a block of legal-sounding nonsense, and a digital QR code that led to a dead page. Another fiction she was daring us to believe. But it worked. I'd already seen 3 families yank their kids off Glenwood Knoll since her return. One woman actually apologized to her toddler for letting them run through the grass. That was the effect of unchecked power. People became scared of joy. Rowan had stopped asking to go outside. The window blinds in his room stayed shut. When I brought him tea, he asked if I could put books in the sunroom instead. "Too close to the hill," he said. It was the first time I heard bitterness in his voice. That night, I walked the perimeter of Glenwood Knoll alone, trying to see it the way Marcelli did. Not as a place where kids played, but as some imagined threat to order. I noticed something new, tucked behind a low planter near the slope's base, a tiny black device, no bigger than a phone charger, wired into the HOA's sprinkler controls. I knelt. It had no branding, just a blinking red light and a zip-tied cable running underground. I didn't touch it, just took a photo and stepped back. I knew this tactic, not from parenting, but from court audits, unauthorized infrastructure. Marsley was installing silent boundary deterrents, tools of intimidation that most residents wouldn't notice, but enough would sense, and it would keep them off the hill. I returned home, uploaded the photo into my evidence folder, and labeled it Unauthorized Surveillance Node, West Slope, theft east of irrigation line. She was getting bolder. The next morning, I visited my neighbor, Thomas Ellery, who used to serve on the HOA's audit committee before retiring. His house sat near the edge of the community, just behind a retention wall that backed Glenwood Knoll. He greeted me with the same suspicion everyone carried lately, until I showed him the photo. His eyebrows furrowed. We didn't approve any new installations this year. Could she have ordered it privately? Not legally, not without vendor registration and board consent. Would those records be public? They're supposed to be posted to the portal. You won't find them. He paused. But I might have copies, he added. Thomas invited me into his garage, past shelves of gardening tools and a dusty unplugged laptop. From a drawer beneath an old HOA binder, he retrieved a thumb drive. Everything from last year, votes, contracts, emails. She didn't think anyone kept backups. I took it carefully. This changes things. He looked at me, serious now. You're really going after her? She fired a gun at my son. He nodded. Then don't stop halfway. I didn't plan to. Later that night, I opened the drive and began comparing timestamps. Not a single vote existed for any preservation enforcement policy. No expense requests for new devices, no mention of buffer zones. But I did find something else, an HOA email chain where Marcelli had cited uncooperative residents and suggested using non-visible enforcement methods to encourage behavior compliance. That phrasing, behavior compliance, didn't belong in any neighborhood, let alone one with children. I flagged the email, timestamped the chain, and saved a local copy. She wasn't just inventing rules, she was weaponizing the silence of others. But silence, I was learning, could be broken one record at a time. The only thing more important than capturing the moment a law is broken is proving no one stopped it when they could. I kept hearing that sentence in my head, words from a seminar I taught just last spring to a room full of junior code auditors. I'd said it half distracted, chalking it on a whiteboard while fielding questions about evidentiary admissibility. But now it echoed like a directive from somewhere above me, heavy with purpose. By the following Tuesday, I had 2 separate pieces of footage in my hands. The first was mine, taken from the camera I'd mounted at the corner of our roof, facing the slope. It wasn't the best angle, but it had sound, crisp, directional sound. It captured the blast, the exact words Marcelli shouted, and the tremble in Rowan's voice when he called out for me. The second was from the city. The traffic pole across from Glenwood Knoll wasn't installed by the HOA. It was part of a county-wide environmental tracking program, the kind that logs rainfall, erosion, and heat signatures across green spaces. A quiet little project nobody noticed, except me. Because I helped build the legal data usage policy for it 3 years ago, I knew exactly who to call. After 2 phone calls, a signed release, and a chain of custody handoff, I had the raw feed. A crystal-clear shot of Marcelli Harrow, raising the revolver, shouting, and firing into the dirt. No edits, no context missing. A clean timestamp. Weather overlays, no interpretation required. I watched it twice. The first time, I flinched. The second time, I stared through her face like glass. Then, I stitched the 2 clips together, mine and the city's. Split screen, synced to the millisecond. One showed the macro, the other caught the soul of it. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel rage. Just a cold, distant lock inside my chest. Like my body knew what came next and was preserving all the heat for later. I pulled up the State Commission's Civil Oversight Reporting portal, created a secure case folder, uploaded the footage, named it Harrow Glenwood Incident, Level 1 Endangerment Submission. Next, I logged into the local clerk's portal, selected the county's civil court division, and began filing the incident as a petition for protective injunction and civil liability complaint against the HOA board and sitting president. I had standing. Rowan was a minor. There was video evidence. The accused was not only a resident, but an elected authority within the neighborhood, and I had proof of systemic abuse tied to her governance. When I submitted the filings, I included a separate memo addressed to the commission chair. A quiet favor returned. No embellishment, just clean facts. 3 hours later, I received confirmation. Both filings were accepted. case numbers assigned, initial hearing scheduled. The same day, I got a call back from someone I hadn't expected. Judge Thadrick Quell. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. "There's one more file you'll want." "What kind?" "The installation contract for the pressure-triggered noise emitters she's been burying near the knoll." My breath caught. "The ones by the planter boxes?" She told the board it was landscaping tech. I found the actual invoice. It's not. It's from a company that designs periphery deterrents for private security firms. Are those legal? Not without disclosure and user consent, especially not in common access areas. He sighed. "She's been trying to scrub the file from the HOA archive, but I have the original pull date." I sat back, stunned. That means she's exposed the HOA to civil liability. It means she crossed the line from negligence into coordinated suppression. He paused. "I'll get it to you tomorrow." I thanked him and hung up. Outside, I saw Rowan sitting by the back window, watching the trees shift in the late-day wind. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't closed off either, just quiet, still trying to understand how his sanctuary became a danger zone. I looked down at my laptop, at the two feeds, paused mid-frame, her finger on the trigger, his shoes covered in grass. This wasn't just about us anymore. Marsley had turned Glenwood Knoll into a battlefield. I was going to turn it into a courtroom. Rowan didn't come out of his room the next morning. I didn't push. He needed space. But I left a note on his door that said, "You didn't do anything wrong. You were exactly where you were supposed to be." Downstairs, I brewed coffee and opened my inbox. There it was, an attachment from Judge Quell. No subject line, just a PDF titled Contract Cascade Audio Services HOA. I opened it slowly, already knowing what I'd find. The invoice was dated 6 months ago. It listed 4 ultrasonic perimeter emitters, custom embedded with moisture camouflage housing. Itemized total, $4,200. Vendor notes included installation at community slope zones. And in the signature line, under approved by, were 2 type names, M. Harrow and T. Quell. But Quell had already told me he never signed it. And it wasn't an ink signature, it was a digital insertion. He'd been forged. I clicked the metadata tab on the file. The last person to edit it wasn't the HOA secretary. It was Marceli's own admin account, 5 days after the supposed purchase date. She'd doctored the approval. I ran the timestamps through validation software. The forgery was easy to prove. No legal timestamp, no vote log, no certificate of authenticity attached. Just a Word doc turned PDF with a digital lie baked into the footer. And that's when it changed. It wasn't just abuse of authority anymore. It was document fraud. A board president falsifying internal records to justify installing surveillance-grade deterrents in a shared public area, with children present. And she had done it without insurance notification, without city permits, without a board vote. I didn't need to imagine what the oversight board would think. I was the guy they used to call when things like this slipped through the cracks. Now, I had everything I needed to blow the cracks wide open. I bundled the file into my master folder and updated the report, labeling the new section, Phase 2, Equipment Misrepresentation and Unauthorized Installations. I backed it up to 3 drives. One went in my fireproof lockbox. The other 2 went off-site, one to my attorney, one to the commission's intake hub. Just before noon, I got a knock. Lorna stood on my porch, arms folded, tight expression. Her daughter, Ava, stood behind her, eyes darting toward the hill across the street. "She's back," Lorna said, "and she's saying the retraining seminar cleared her, that she's reinstated." I didn't flinch. "She's bluffing. There's no clearance process for pending felony charges." Lorna nodded. I figured, but people are believing her. She walked by the playground earlier and told 3 parents the grass hill was now a sanctioned no-go zone. One of them cried, "Where is she now?" "She's in the community center, locked herself in the office." Of course she had. I stepped outside and glanced toward the hill. The sun was harsh today. Glenwood Knoll looked like a postcard, untouched, sunlit, sloped just enough to be perfect for sliding down on cardboard. And yet, it was empty. Dead grass where joy used to be. Lorna handed me a folder. "Someone slid this under my door yesterday. No return name. Just this." Inside were 6 violation notices from the past 2 months, each issued to a different family, all signed by Marcelli, none of which appeared in the HOA's online citation tracker. "She's going off book," Lorna said, making threats, then erasing them from the system. I nodded. "That's enough for pattern of misconduct." "We're ready, Aldrich," she said. "Tell us when." I didn't answer immediately. I just looked back at the slope. The bench at the top was still weather-worn, the one the HOA never approved replacing because it was a non-essential expense. My wife had loved sitting there. It was the first place she said she felt calm after her diagnosis. We scattered some of her ashes near the roots. She would have hated what it had become. I turned back to Lorna. "Give me one more day. The filings are in. The footage has been verified. Tomorrow, we make it public." She nodded once and left. Later that night, Rowan came downstairs. He didn't say anything, just held out the same paper airplane he used to throw down Glenwood Knoll. I took it, turned it in my hand, then handed it back. He pointed at the hill. "Can we go tomorrow?" I looked him in the eye. "Yes," I said. "We're taking it back." Judge Quell didn't knock. He just appeared on my porch at 6:42 a.m., his silhouette hunched against the cold. He held a paper bag in one hand and a battered manila folder in the other. No words, just an expression that said everything was already unraveling in his head. I let him in without a word. He set the folder on my dining table, then pushed the paper bag toward me. "Coffee. I didn't know if you take cream." "I do," I said, pulling out the thermos. "You didn't need to bring this." "I did, because what's in there?" He tapped the folder. "It's what finally broke me." I opened it slowly. Inside were printed email threads, unredacted internal memos, and a signed letter from Marcelli addressed to a private vendor in Clearwater. The language was technical, but the meaning was clear. She had personally authorized the installation of audio deterrents, motion-sensing floodlights, and unauthorized boundary markers under the title Non-Invasive Environmental Conditioning. One line in the letter stood out in bold, underlined, "Residents must never become aware of the correctional mechanisms. Our authority depends on the illusion of consent." My hands clenched. Quell sat across from me, not touching his coffee. "I signed none of it." She forged at least 3 of those signatures, mine, the treasurer's, and the secretary's. "Do they know?" "The treasurer suspects. The secretary left 3 months ago. Burnout." I kept flipping pages, trying to steady my breath. "Why didn't you stop her sooner?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that admitting I'd been part of it, even passively, would be worse than staying quiet. But when she pointed a gun at your son, that cowardice stopped being survivable." I studied his face. There was no polish left, just wear. "There's a hearing scheduled in 3 days," I said. "Civil court. Emergency injunction motion is already filed. The footage is in. The forgery metadata is validated. Your documents, seal it." He nodded. "Then I'm ready to speak." "You'll be named." "Good," he said. "I want it to be mine." He stood, taking a long breath as he glanced toward the window. Glenwood Knoll shimmered in the morning light, still untouched, still eerily empty. "She wanted silence," he said. "You're giving her the opposite." After he left, I spent the rest of the morning backing up the files to an encrypted drive. Then I contacted the State Oversight Board again and submitted an addendum to my original complaint, attaching the vendor letters and falsified contract signatures. This was no longer just civil negligence. It was premeditated manipulation of authority, forgery of financial instruments, and community-level fraud. By noon, I was on a call with the Assistant District Attorney's office. They had already been alerted by the civil court filings and had started an internal risk review. My footage had been flagged as evidentiary priority. It was moving faster than I expected, but not fast enough for Marcelli. At 3:07 p.m., she posted a new HOA bulletin, this time using her emergency access card to override the member login system. A single message appeared on everyone's portal homepage. Due to continuing community unrest and non-compliance, Glenwood Knoll will be permanently restricted effective immediately. All future access will result in monetary penalties and possible legal action. HOA President M. Harrow. No vote, no signatures. Just a digital decree like she was queen of the cul-de-sac. But now I had something she didn't. Evidence backed by a witness she could no longer control. That night, I called Lorna, Thomas, and 3 other residents I trusted. We met in my garage with folding chairs and a shared determination I hadn't seen since the day Rowan was born. I played the split-screen video on a mounted TV. Some of them gasped. One woman wept when she saw her own son's name appear in a hidden memo, labeled a habitual trespasser. When the video ended, I handed them printouts of the civil hearing date and instructions for submitting community impact statements. No one hesitated. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. As they left, Lorna turned to me and said, "She's going to come out swinging." I nodded. "Let her." Because this time, we weren't flinching. By sunrise, I'd already laid out the framework for the counterplan. Not just a complaint, not just a lawsuit, a systemic takedown, methodical, evidence-driven, and built to withstand every excuse she'd ever rehearsed. Rowan was still asleep when I left that morning. I paused by his door and listened to his breathing. Calm, even. I hadn't heard him speak in his sleep since the shooting. That silence meant something was beginning to settle inside him. Or maybe inside me. The first stop was the county clerk's office. I wasn't filing anything new. I needed certified copies of the filings already in motion, the hearing docket, the exhibit list, the validated footage log, the certified digital timestamps. I needed them notarized and cross-indexed so no defense could claim mishandling. I watched the clerk thumb through the folders, her eyes pausing slightly on the still of Marcelli holding the revolver, mouth frozen mid-shout. She didn't say a word, just stamped the corner and slid it back. "This will hold," she said softly. "You've got enough here to collapse a board." I left with the documents wrapped in 2 layers of sealed covers. One went into my case brief, the other into a red envelope labeled Public Record Disclosure, Media Eligible. Not because I planned to go to the press, not yet. But if the board tried to sweep this, I wanted every safeguard in place. Next was the Oversight Commission. I wasn't just a resident anymore. I was acting under my old title, Compliance Audit Liaison, courtesy of a retained consulting badge I never thought I'd use again. I walked through the security checkpoint, submitted my clearance ID, and waited in the intake lobby as the case manager reviewed the materials. 10 minutes later, a plain-dressed man in a charcoal vest called my name. "You brought a full docket?" "I brought enough to merit internal escalation," I said. "And a witness." He raised an eyebrow. "Quell." "Willing, signed affidavit, originals notarized, vendor trail, digital forgery metadata, falsified HOA authorizations." He exhaled. "You're going after more than a board president. I'm going after a culture of immunity." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me." We walked through 2 corridors into a smaller conference room. There, I handed over the drive and the printed exhibits. He began skimming the pages while I unpacked the legal timeline on a whiteboard. Weapon incident, prior violations, installation fraud, pattern of concealment. "What are you asking for?" he said finally. "Emergency intervention under Article 9, Section 2 of HOA Oversight. Temporary administrative freeze. Suspend Marcelli Harrow's authority, restrict access to HOA communication tools, and initiate board re-election protocol. With observer oversight." He leaned back. "You're prepared." "I've been quiet too long." He tapped the folder. "We'll contact you in 24 hours. I left that room not feeling like I'd won anything, just confirmed that I was walking the path I should have stepped on sooner. That evening, I began preparing the exhibit boards for the hearing, row by row of screen captures, chain of custody certification sheets, and call logs. I printed the altered invoice, the forged signature metadata, and the vendor email where they confirmed no board vote was ever presented. At the center, I placed one photo. Rowan, the moment just before the shot, his eyes wide, frozen at the edge of Glenwood Knoll. The still image wasn't the most graphic. It wasn't even the most legally valuable, but it was the truth of everything. I looked at that photo and remembered the bench where we spread Claire's ashes. The first place Rowan laughed again after she was gone. The hill she picked out of a real estate brochure and called hope-colored. Marcelli tried to strip that place of its peace. She turned grass into a boundary, flowers into violations, and silence into submission. But I'd turned her weapons into records, her secrets into public exhibits, and her threats into cause. As I rolled up the exhibits and labeled each binder, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt the weight of a promise I finally had the power to keep. I parked outside the community center just before 8 a.m., ahead of the final prep meeting. The building had once been the heart of Laurel Vale, a place for potlucks, garden swaps, weekend yoga. But now, it felt like a courtroom without robes. Empty folding chairs waited in tight rows. The scent of dry erase markers hung heavy in the air. And in the corner, someone had unplugged the HOA's welcome sign screen. No one greeted me, not even the receptionist. I carried the binders in myself, exhibit boards strapped under one arm, certified documents in a weatherproof folder, a backup USB around my neck. I didn't trust the system to hold if I didn't personally keep the pieces together. Judge Quell arrived second, no suit, no tie, just a windbreaker, as if dressing casually might somehow distance him from everything he'd allowed to happen. But the folder in his hand told a different story. Yellowed emails, meeting minutes, handwritten notes in his own shaky pen. He was finally coming clean. "You ready?" I asked. "Not even slightly," he said. "But I'm done pretending." The others filtered in slowly. Lorna and Thomas first, then a young mother named Emily, who'd once been fined for a sidewalk chalk drawing her daughter made. She held a stack of photos, each one showing the same slope, the same sunlit green, and different children smiling, before the fear set in. By 9:15, we had 10 residents in the room. All of them had received violation slips for things that didn't exist in any official policy. All of them had either filed impact statements or were prepared to testify under oath. This wasn't a protest. It was preparation. I distributed outlines, what to expect during the hearing, how to deliver statements with clarity, and what not to engage with if Marcelli tried to redirect blame. This wasn't about emotion. It was about legal collapse. "You won't need to argue," I told them. "The evidence speaks. The records are airtight." Someone asked, "Do you think she'll even show?" "She'll show," I said. "She thinks she can still control the outcome." And she tried. At exactly 10:02 a.m., Marcelli Harrow entered the building, flanked by 2 members of the HOA board and her attorney, a man I recognized from previous city compliance cases, the kind who specialized in policy vagueness and procedural misdirection. She wore all beige, minimal makeup, a small lapel pin with the HOA's emblem, as if she still represented something pure. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge Quell either, but when she passed the table where the community members sat, she glanced at Rowan's photo sitting at the center and paused, just for a second. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something. She kept walking. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. The projection screen was already set up. My laptop synced to it, the footage cued and muted, waiting for the court technician to prompt me. By 10:30, the administrative judge presiding over the HOA civil hearing took her seat at the front of the room. She looked over the docket, reviewed the petition titles, and finally said, "We'll begin with evidentiary exhibits presented by the petitioner." I stood, plugged in the drive, and pressed play. The silence in that room as the first shot rang out on screen wasn't ordinary. It wasn't shock. It was confirmation. There was no way to explain it. No way to soften the sound of a gun being fired at a child's feet while citing fabricated environmental regulations. No way to pretend she hadn't done it. Then came the second video, the surveillance poll feed, crystal clear, time-stamped, synchronized. The exact moment Marcelli's finger curled around the trigger and shouted words she'd later deny in writing. Gasps, hands over mouths, eyes narrowing. When it ended, I turned off the screen and stepped back. "This," I said, placing the binders down one by one, "isn't a case of misinterpretation. It's an ecosystem of abuse, created, directed, and enforced by one person, with no oversight." The judge looked down at her notes, eyes unreadable. Then she called the next witness. "Thadrick Quell, please come forward." He stood slowly. His papers shook in his hands, but his voice didn't. And as he walked to the stand, I knew the wall was cracking. The lies were finally speaking against themselves. Thadrick Quell didn't read from the paper in his hands. He held it like he might, but after clearing his throat twice and adjusting his glasses, he folded it in half and set it aside. "My name is Thadrick Quell. I've served as vice president of the Laurel Vale HOA for 13 years. I was also a municipal boundary judge for 21 years before retiring." He looked straight ahead. "What I'm about to say won't protect my reputation, but it may restore something far more important, this community's ability to trust its own rules. he went on, voice measured, the kind that had once delivered verdicts in property disputes and land easement conflicts. But now every sentence was a confession. He admitted that Marceli Harrow had bypassed official votes for more than a year, that she frequently ordered policy summaries to be uploaded in place of ratified bylaws, that several expense authorizations, including the one for the deterrent devices, were pushed through under the false pretense of prior board consensus. She manipulated our systems, our silence, and our fear, he said, and I let her. Gasps were muffled behind palms and shared glances across the room. Even the administrative judge's pen stopped moving. Then he did the thing that shifted the air entirely. He reached into his briefcase and removed a slim black USB. "This contains my full export of internal HOA communications," he said, including draft amendments Marceli authored herself and backdated, along with vendor correspondence where she signed contracts alone, under board letterhead. Her attorney stood abruptly. "We object to the admission of materials not previously included in the discovery exchange." The judge cut him off. "You'll sit down, counselor. You'll have a chance to review everything after today's session. We are not excluding testimony that directly speaks to forgery and misrepresentation from a standing board member." Quell's hands trembled slightly as he passed the drive to the court clerk, but his eyes never dropped. Marceli sat statue still, not a blink, not a protest, not even a glance toward the man who had, until now, shielded her by omission. And then Quell looked at me. Not long, just enough. A quiet apology without a word. The judge recessed for 15 minutes to review the submitted drive, leaving the room heavy with the kind of stillness that only comes before collapse. When we returned, she wasted no time. "This board is under emergency review," she said, "pending further legal investigation into financial misrepresentation, procedural misconduct, and civil endangerment. HOA President Marceli Harrow is hereby suspended from all duties, privileges, and decision-making capacities until further notice." Murmurs surged across the chairs. Someone whispered, "Finally?" Another said, "It's over." But I didn't move. Not yet. Because she wasn't done. The judge turned toward me. "Mr. Wren, your petition for injunction has been accepted. A no-contact order is now active protecting your son and immediate household from the respondent." She paused. "And I'll be referring this case to the county prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges, including the unauthorized use of deterrent devices in a shared space and discharge of a firearm in proximity to a minor." That's when Marceli finally reacted. Her mouth twitched. Her hands gripped the sides of her chair. She turned toward her attorney, who leaned in with lips moving fast. But she didn't speak. Not to the court. Not to anyone else. She stood a minute later and walked out of the room with her attorney trailing her. No apology. No acknowledgement of the families seated behind her. Just the retreat of someone whose paper empire had caught fire. Outside the center, the air felt different. Lighter. Lorna exhaled in one long breath, while Thomas just stared at the exit door, as if waiting for her to reappear. She didn't. Rowan wasn't there. I hadn't brought him. He didn't need to see this part. But when I got home and told him, he only asked one question. "Can we go to the hill now?" So we did. We walked to Glenwood Knoll together, the same worn trail we hadn't touched in weeks. At the top, we sat on the old bench. He didn't say anything, just handed me his paper airplane again, already folded. I held it up. He nodded. I let it go. It sailed longer than I expected. The final board meeting before the scheduled re-election wasn't supposed to be dramatic. Just a formality to acknowledge the suspension, dissolve Marcelegi's pending proposals, and review eligibility for interim leadership. But by the time I arrived, the room was standing room only. Parents, retirees, even the quiet couple from Lot 23 who never spoke at meetings had shown up. No one was angry, no one shouted. But there was a hum beneath everything. Like everyone had finally realized they'd been living under the same weight, and tonight was the moment it might lift. At the front of the room, the remaining board members sat awkwardly spaced. 3 of the 5 chairs were occupied. One by the treasurer, who refused to make eye contact. One by a substitute secretary, and in the middle, Judge Thadrick Quell. He didn't wear the windbreaker this time. He wore a suit, the same kind he used to wear in court, the fabric slightly too stiff, the lines too straight. a man trying to make peace by dressing like someone else. As acting chair, he opened the meeting with exactly one sentence. Effective immediately, the Preservation Enforcement Zone surrounding Glenwood Knoll is revoked, and all fabricated policies under Marcelli Harrow's leadership are nullified. No motion, no vote, just a statement delivered with the weight of the hearing behind it. He continued, "We are entering a full compliance audit of past HOA actions. Residents who were issued invalid citations will be notified of restitution options by the end of the quarter." That was the moment the room shifted. Not clapping, not cheering, just posture, back straightening, shoulders unhunching. You could feel something fall away from the crowd, something invisible and years old. Quell paused, then added, "I will not be seeking re-election." A few murmurs, but no protest. Just respect. Then he looked out over the room, and his gaze landed on me. "Aldrich Wren," he said, "would you step forward?" I didn't move at first, not out of hesitation, but from the sheer weight of being named in that space. But eventually, I walked to the front. He gestured toward the microphone. I didn't have a speech prepared. I didn't need one. I cleared my throat, looked over the faces, Lorna, Thomas, the single father from Lot 14, who once had to sell his daughter's trampoline after a citation, the librarian whose herb garden had been uprooted by aesthetic mandate. This community, I said, was never supposed to be about control. It was supposed to be about shared space, trust, and peace. I took a breath. Many of you already know what happened. You've seen the footage, you've read the filings, you've heard about the cameras, the contracts, the lies. But what matters most isn't what she did. It's what we let happen by being too afraid, too isolated, or too quiet to stop it. Someone near the back nodded slowly. "Let this be the last meeting where silence holds power." I stepped away. There were no applause, no cheers, just that same hum, that rising shift in the air, like people were stepping back into something they'd abandoned. After the meeting, people lingered in the hall. Some offered thanks. Others just stood near each other for the first time in months, no longer darting away like targets. A few kids had gathered at the door, whispering, waiting. Rowan stood among them, holding his paper airplane, still folded, still perfect. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. I walked him home slowly. As we passed Glenwood Knoll, we both stopped. In the golden wash of sunset, the hill looked alive again. No signs, no boundary tape, just open space. Rowan didn't wait for permission. He stepped into the grass, knelt down, and ran his hand along the blades like he was making sure they were real. Then he stood, raised his arm, and let the airplane fly. It caught the wind, banked, and arced over the slope like it had never been shot at, never been stained with fear. And I knew, without needing to say it, that it would land exactly where it was always meant to. Home. 2 weeks after the final meeting, Laurel Vale looked different. The manicured silence that once blanketed the neighborhood had been replaced by the faint noise of children again. Shoes on pavement, laughter spilling over fences, voices echoing across Glenwood Knoll. The sound carried through my open window every morning, like proof that something broken could mend. I stood outside on the hill that morning, with Rowan, the air cool and clean after a night of rain. The grass was damp, the blades still bent from the weight of water. At the top, near the line of sycamores, sat the new bench. It wasn't HOA property anymore. It had been donated by the residents as a collective gift. The plaque was small, bronze, understated. For those who believed safety should never require silence. Rowan traced the letters with his fingertip. "You wrote that?" he asked. "Not alone," I said. "Everyone helped." He nodded, his hair catching the light. "It's good." He didn't say much else, but he didn't need to. He ran down the hill a few seconds later, calling for Ava and the other kids who'd returned that week. They'd built cardboard sleds again, lined them with plastic wrap, and planned to race after lunch. For the first time since the day of the shooting, his laugh sounded unguarded. I sat on the bench and watched him go. The paper airplane was still tucked in his jacket pocket, creased and worn, the same one that had never quite flown straight until today. He launched it toward the sky, and this time it caught the wind perfectly, climbing higher before it dipped and disappeared behind the trees. Behind me, footsteps approached on the path. I turned to see Judge Quell. He wasn't in his suit anymore, just a simple flannel shirt and jeans, a coffee thermos in one hand. He stopped beside the bench, looking out at the hill. "They're already talking about turning this into a protected play space," he said. "City Council's reviewing the proposal next week." "That'll make it official," I said. He smiled faintly. "You did that." "No," I said. "We did." He nodded. "Still, I should thank you. You reminded me that the law's only as strong as the people willing to hold it accountable." We both fell quiet for a while. The sounds of the kids drifted up again, broken by bursts of laughter and the soft rush of the wind. "She won't be back," he said finally. "I know." "The charges?" "Confirmed. Forgery, unlawful installation of surveillance tech, discharge of a firearm in a shared zone. The prosecutor's office is moving fast. Her attorney's already negotiating a plea." He looked at the bench plaque. "You ever think you'd end up the one rebuilding what she destroyed?" "Not once," I said, "but I'm glad it wasn't anyone else." He gave a slow nod, then started back down the trail, leaving me there with the sunlight shifting through the trees. A few neighbors passed by. Throughout the morning, each one slower than the last, each stopping for a moment to look at the bench or the kids or the slope itself. None of them said much. They didn't need to. Just a small wave or a nod, acknowledgement that the hill wasn't just grass anymore. It was a marker of what we'd all survived. Later that evening, Rowan asked if we could stay out past dark. The others had gone home, but he wanted to see the lights come on across the hill. The HOA's floodlights had been removed, replaced with low solar lanterns that flickered gently as the sun sank. We sat side by side on the bench. The air smelled like wet earth and pine sap. Rowan leaned his head against my arm. For the first time in months, he didn't ask if we were safe. We just were. The stars came out one by one above us. The hill glowed faintly, dotted with the small lanterns, like a constellation turned inside out. It wasn't quiet, but it was peace, the kind born not from control, but from healing. When Rowan finally fell asleep against my shoulder, I looked down at him and whispered what I'd never had the strength to before. "It's over. You can breathe again." He stirred slightly, smiled in his sleep, and let the world keep spinning without fear.